had always admired Sophia. She was the kind of woman who didn't need to raise her voice to command attention. The moment she stepped into a room, conversations quieted, eyes turned, and everyone listened. Working for her was demanding, intense. She had high expectations and tolerated no mediocrity. But personally, she was a mystery. She didn't share much about her private life. No unnecessary small talk, no oversharing during office happy hours. She was poised, controlled, untouchable. And yet, despite all that distance, I found myself drawn to her in ways I couldn't explain. At first, it was nothing. Just admiration, respect. But then there were moments. Moments where I caught myself watching her for too long. Noticing things I shouldn't. How sharp her cheekbones were. The way she tilted her head when she was deep in thought. The way her lips curved slightly when she was about to prove someone wrong. It was ridiculous. I had never looked at a woman like that before. I was straight, wasn't I? At least I thought I was. But whatever this was, I kept it to myself. Locked it away, buried it under professionalism and common sense. Until the day she called me into her office. I had barely taken my seat when she got straight to the point, her eyes locked onto mine with that piercing gaze that always made me feel like she could see straight through me. "Alicia, I need someone I trust on this business trip," she said smoothly. "It's 5 days. Can you come?" Just like that. As if it were nothing. As if my heart wasn't already hammering in my chest just from the way she was looking at me. I swallowed, gripping the armrests of the chair as I forced my voice to remain steady. "Of course." Her lips twitched, almost like she was pleased with my answer. "Good." And that was it. No further explanation. No unnecessary words. I left her office with my pulse still racing, my mind spinning. It was just a work trip. Strictly professional. Then why did it feel like something had shifted? Like something unseen had been set into motion? I didn't know. But I was about to find out. The trip was supposed to be strictly professional. And for the most part, it was. Meetings, negotiations, networking. Every hour of our schedule meticulously planned. I spent my days watching Sophia command boardrooms with an effortless confidence that left everyone hanging onto her every word. She was brilliant, unshakable. Every calculated decision, every precise response only solidified what I had always known about her. She was a force of nature. And yet, the more time we spent together, the harder it became to ignore the undercurrent of something else simmering between us. Something neither of us acknowledged. Something that became undeniable the night of the dinner. It was meant to be a casual meal after a long day. Nothing more. The restaurant was dimly lit, warm, intimate. The kind of place where people leaned in close to talk, where candlelight flickered against glasses of deep red wine. At first, the conversation stayed in familiar territory, business, logistics, the deals we had closed earlier that day. Then came the first glass of wine. Then the second. And somewhere between the swirl of her drink and the low hum of the music in the background, the conversation shifted. We talked about ambitions, dreams, the things that made us feel alive. She asked me what I wanted out of life, what drove me, what made me push harder even when things got tough. I told her everything, and she listened. Not just politely, not just out of obligation. She really listened like my words mattered. No one had ever looked at me like that before. And when I asked her the same, her usual guarded expression softened, just slightly. She told me about the weight of expectations. About the loneliness that came with being at the top. About how sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to just let go. For the first time, I saw Sophia as more than just my boss. She was a woman, a person, and that realization unraveled something inside me. Then, in the middle of a lull in conversation, she did it. She held my gaze, steady, intense, and said, "You intrigue me." My breath faltered. Sophia wasn't the type of woman who said things she didn't mean. She wasn't the type to fill silence with meaningless words. Which meant this was something. A crack in the carefully constructed wall between us. Something silently permitted. I should have laughed it off. Changed the subject. Done anything to pull us back into safer territory. But instead, I leaned in slightly, my pulse thrumming in my ears, and asked, "Why?" The question left my lips before I could stop it, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. For a moment, she just watched me. And in that moment, I knew. We had already crossed a line. Even if we hadn't touched. Even if no one else could see it. Something between us had shifted. And there was no going back. Part 3. The line we crossed. The air was thick with unspoken words as we stepped into the elevator. The ride to our floor should have taken less than a minute, but time felt different inside that small, enclosed space. Slower. Heavy. Charged. Sophia stood beside me, her posture as composed as ever, but there was a tension in the way she held herself, an energy crackling just beneath the surface. Neither of us spoke. We didn't have to. The silence was its own kind of conversation. When the doors finally slid open, we stepped into the dimly lit hallway, walking side by side. Our footsteps were the only sound, muffled against the plush carpet. Then, outside her door, she hesitated. She turned to me, her expression unreadable, her gaze lingering on mine for a second too long. Then, softly, deliberately, she asked, "Do you want to come in?" It wasn't just a question. It was a challenge. An invitation laced with something dangerous. I knew what this meant. I knew what I was stepping into. And yet, I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about what tomorrow would bring. I just nodded. And the moment I crossed that threshold, I knew. There was no going back. And I didn't want there to be. She locked the door behind us, the click echoing through the room. My pulse thundered as I turned to face her, every nerve in my body alive, waiting. She didn't move right away. She just looked at me. Really looked at me. Like she was drinking me in, deciding what to do with me. And I had never been looked at like that before. By anyone. It wasn't just attraction. It was possession. Desire, sharp and unmistakable, darkening her gaze. I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my throat. No man had ever made me feel like this. No man had ever looked at me like I was something to be devoured. And God, I liked it. She took a slow step forward, her movements controlled, deliberate. I could smell her perfume, subtle, intoxicating. And then she reached out, her fingertips grazing my arm, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. I shivered. She leaned in, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered, "I want you. I want you as you came into the world." The words sent a shudder through me. Not just because of what she said, but because I wanted her too. More than I had ever wanted anything. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, waiting, giving me a chance to walk away. But I wasn't going anywhere. And when I reached for her, when I finally let go of every doubt, every question, every fear, she caught my face in her hands and kissed me like she had been waiting for this moment all along. She guided me backward, her hands firm yet patient, like she was savoring every second of this. I felt the edge of the bed against the back of my legs, and before I could even process what was happening, she was there, right there, so close that the space between us ceased to exist. My pulse thundered, my breath unsteady. I had never been looked at like this before. Like I was something rare, something worth devouring. Her fingertips traced a slow path along my arm, barely a touch, yet enough to send a shiver down my spine. I wasn't used to this. The intensity, the slow, deliberate way she studied me, as if she wanted to commit every reaction, every little shift in my body to memory. She was in control. And I didn't want to stop her. Didn't want control. Not tonight. She reached for the buttons of my blouse, and for a split second my breath hitched. Not out of hesitation, but because the weight of what was happening, what had already started happening, hit me all at once. This was real. There was no undoing this, no brushing it off as a mistake tomorrow morning. Because I didn't want it to be a mistake. She must have noticed the shift in my breathing because her movements slowed, her fingers pausing at the fabric, waiting, giving me a chance to stop this. I met her gaze, and in that moment, every unspoken thought between us passed in silence. There was no going back, and I didn't want there to be. So I nodded, and with that, she slipped the fabric from my shoulders, her touch sending warmth flooding through me. Everything she did, every movement, every press of her lips against my skin, was unhurried, calculated, like she was savoring the weight of this moment as much as I was. I had never been touched like this before. Never been seen like this before. She made sure of that. And when our lips met again, when she guided me back against the softness of the bed, every last coherent thought slipped away, lost in the fire of her touch. Our bodies moved in sync, learning, exploring, discovering. There was no uncertainty, no hesitation. Only her. Only us. And when she whispered my name against my skin, slow and deliberate, I knew. Nothing would ever be the same again. The room was still dark when I woke up. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what had happened settle over me like a slow, creeping wave. Beside me, Sophia was still asleep, her breathing deep, steady. The sheets were tangled between us, her her bare shoulder peeking out from beneath the soft fabric. Strands of her dark hair spilled across the pillow, and in the dim light, she looked almost peaceful. My boss. That word felt foreign now. Because after last night, after the way she had looked at me, touched me, there was no going back to how things were before. I turned onto my side, watching her for a moment. The sharpness she always carried, the poise, the control, was gone in sleep. She looked softer, younger somehow, like the weight of the world wasn't pressing down on her for once. I felt something tighten in my chest. I hadn't planned for this. For her. For the way she made me question everything I thought I knew about myself. I had spent my life believing I was one thing, one kind of person, with clear lines drawn in my mind about who I was and what I wanted. And then Sophia walked into my life and blurred every single one of them. I exhaled slowly, carefully slipping out of bed, feeling the cool air against my skin as I reached for the hotel robe draped over the chair. I needed to think. I needed space. But even as I stood by the window, looking out at the city still wrapped in the quiet of early morning, my mind kept replaying everything from the night before. The way she had pulled me closer, her touch leaving fire in its wake. The way she had whispered my name, slow, deliberate, like she was savoring the way it felt on her lips. The way I had melted under the weight of her attention, the intensity in her eyes making me feel like there was nothing else in the world but us. I shivered, hugging the robe tighter around myself, trying to steady my breath. Because as incredible as last night had been, reality was waiting. We had a flight to catch, an office to return to, and whatever this was, whatever we were, wasn't going to stay hidden within the four walls of this hotel room forever. I heard the rustle of sheets behind me, followed by the quiet sound of Sophia shifting. When I turned, she was awake, watching me from where she lay, her expression unreadable. For the first time since meeting her, I had no idea what she was thinking. She sat up slowly, running a hand through her hair before resting her gaze on me. "Come back to bed," she murmured, her voice still laced with sleep. A part of me wanted to forget about what came next, wanted to climb back under the covers and let her pull me into the warmth of her body. But I couldn't. I forced a small smile. "We have to leave soon." Sophia sighed, leaning back against the pillows. "You're thinking too much." I let out a dry laugh. "Of course I am. Because how could I not? This wasn't just some fleeting moment. It was Sophia, my untouchable, unreachable boss. And now there was no more distance between us. She studied me for a long moment, then patted the empty space beside her. 5 more minutes. It wasn't a command. It wasn't a plea. It was an invitation. And for the first time since waking up, I let myself stop thinking. I let myself feel. So I took a breath, and I went back to her,